هننتقل للدكتوره كاميليا، مستشار الدولي محلل الفاقد والمهدر من الأغذية في منظمة الأغذية والزراعة من إيطاليا. Doctor, you are welcome.
Hello.
Hello, you are welcome. We are all now listening to you.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to be the speaker today.
You are welcome.
My presentation is going to be focused on how food loss and waste as a topic is addressed by FAO and how you can be involved directly from national to local level. So without further ado, I will go into the contents. Now, let me please just expand this. All right. So first of all, I would like to clarify for everybody present the food loss definition that is adopted by FAO in the context of the UN Sustainable Food Systems approach for the Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 that addresses food loss and waste. So food losses are all crop and livestock human edible commodity quantities. So we refer to quantities, not quality, that do not re-enter in any other utilization stream, such as animal feed, industrial use, and this is covering from production up to retail. So this is for us food losses. Now, in the overall definition, we have also noticed the need to have a definition that is applicable at food supply chain level because of the work that we are involved in, for instance, to gather information and analysis of this information for food supply chains, such as, for instance, mango or tomato. But in that case, we noticed that we need to be even more specific and refer not only to quantities and stages of the food supply chain, but also if it is edible or not edible, the percentage we are referring to, or if it is something that, for instance, is a loss that refers to nutritional loss. So there are these two different approaches that addresses on one way, on one part, the need to modify, let's say, the need to monitor the progress of the SDG 12.3, and then the need to have an analysis at food supply chain level, and it goes more in depth. Now, overall, food loss and waste, we are all aware, of course, that it's an issue that concerns all regions in the world. Some of them have more data and have, let's say, the confidence level is higher in reporting the data. Some of them are less confident because the information is not yet available. However, this is a global issue that goes, from Sub-Saharan Africa that can deal with issues concerning, for instance, storage, but then you go to Central and Southern Asia that may have different type of storage issues. So even though the problems, the causes of food losses may differ from region to region, overall, the perspective that we take as a UN agency is to work along the food supply chains with the partners at local level and with the governments to address the causes as well as identify the best solutions, which may concern, for instance, policies, which may concern public-private investment. However, it may also concern a very direct intervention on capacity development for those actors in the supply chains that may apply a better way of management of the resources. However, this is, as I said, a global issue. Now, overall, we have been through different steps of the development of this topic from 2015, since the SDG 12.3 was launched, up to this year when, as FAO, we have endorsed a voluntary code of conduct on food losses and waste reduction that was endorsed at conference level. So all the member states of FAO have endorsed this FAO code of conduct that now goes into the implementation at regional level. So each region, for instance, North Africa and the Near East, Asia and the Pacific, now go further with this code of conduct to apply it to the regional specific context. In the same this year, we have also launched a regional strategy for food loss and waste reduction in Asia and the Pacific. So we work also at strategic level. In April, very specific to the region of Near East and North Africa. In April, we have hosted an expert consultation where we have addressed different updates of the actions taken in this region with the overall objective to update the strategy at regional level for the Near East and North Africa region. Now, we have consulted with the different stakeholders, which concern where the participants were from governments, private sector, as well as academia, so civil society. We have identified updated priorities in this region. We have discussed how the FAO Code of Conduct can be adapted to the region. And we have identified best practices because, as of course, already this conference shares, there is a lot going on, lots of information, lots of experience, and very good results that can be shared and be scaled up. Now, our overall approach for scaling up action for prevention and reduction of food waste is based on this hierarchy of food use rather than loss and waste. Now, both approaches are available, and I encourage you to consider in your different context, which means that it may be that as a company, as a local authority, as a country, or as any other actor such as civil society, you may decide whether to go from context-dependent recovery of biomaterials, if you are in the position to work better and directly with biomaterials. However, nothing stops you if you can to work from, let's say, the access of the food down, such as, for instance, recovery and distribution of safe food along your own food supply chain, if you are a company. So as an organization, FAO has this overall approach that is adapted to the context. So whether we do a review at policy level, whether we work at the food supply chain level, or if we mix the two to have a strategic, let's say, commodity-based action plan for interventions, we try to consider this hierarchy, so that we understand that there are actions that prevent, first of all, loss or waste from happening, and at the same time there are actions that reduce what is happening along the food supply chain, taking into consideration that, of course, there is nothing going to be reaching the zero level of waste. So a food use approach that prioritizes action and the impact on better nutrition for human consumption, food that is safe for human consumption. In the context of the SDG, as FAO, we have been mandated to track progress on SDG 12.3, the part on food losses. Now, food losses for us, as I said, start from production and end up to wholesale, not including retail. This part is covered by the food loss index. Now, the food loss index has a part at global level that aggregates the data received from the regions, which is based on the country level data, and then it delivers this global food loss index. However, what I want to highlight for your consideration is that at national level, there is much room for improvement. So even though we have been able to deliver in 2019 the first global food loss index, there is much more room to improvement in the monitoring and reporting from member states. So I encourage you to consider what, from your role, can be to improve this data quality and access that can then deliver a better understanding on the national level situation for food loss and waste, and then through this at global level to understand how the global food loss index goes up and down in percentages of loss. And then in the impact on the economy, for instance, the value of the food that is lost, because each country can choose a different basket of goods, which is part of their national food loss index. Now, after the food loss index, there is the part where FAO is collaborating with UNEP, and UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, has been mandated to follow and track progress on the part of food waste. Now, food waste goes from retail up to households. And in that case, we, together with UNEP, collaborate to deliver this food waste index. And it was also something that was delivered last year for the first time. And even for the food loss index, we have noticed that there is much more room for improvement, even more so, for instance, along the food supply chain level and specifically as well at consumer level. So there is much action that can take place to encourage the consumers not only to monitor the waste, but also local authorities to take action and be part of their community to reduce the pressure that bio-waste, among which the percentage of food waste is almost always in all the contexts that we have studied the highest, can be lowered. Now, by doing this, the local authorities would have gains, socioeconomic and environmental gains. The households would gain also in their capacity to manage better their own resources, and also some nutritional gains because the food will be utilized at its best. So there is much to consider on how interventions and actions can take place. And this depends on context. And we try to work directly to adapt for each. Now, for food losses, we have developed a method. The method we have developed on food losses concerns the identification of critical loss points. Because even though we work from production up to wholesale, we realize that it's important for us to have an understanding which of these points represent the best entry point for the highest impact on the reduction of losses. Because there are many points where losses occur. However, there may be one or two which have the best cost-benefit analysis results. And those are the critical loss points that interest us in order to actually have the best impact. So the method I'm referring to has also a food loss analysis e-learning course, which I invite you to consider. And it's very much broadly explained. It's about 5 to 6 hours of training. And this would allow you to work at food supply chain level to gather and collect information for analysis and identification of critical loss points. And then, of course, based on this, work with the network that this analysis allows you to build in order to actually decide on the interventions and the investments, whether it is financial, human, or capacity development. This is a e-learning course already available from FAO. So the method is very straightforward, concerns the selection of the food supply chain. And once the selection of the food supply chain is done, which can vary a lot, depending on the priority in the local context, you screen. So you have an initial research that allows you to understand the food supply chain level that is selected in depth. Then you have a field investigation that can be integrated with interviews, surveys that are based specifically for that commodity that was selected, stakeholder consultations, because each supply chain level is something that needs to be understood and mapped for their stakeholders. Now, the load tracking is physically following the quantities and physical measurement to understand from production, from harvest, actually, from the point of harvest up until wholesale, what is happening with the quantities. So some commodities may be quicker in this analysis. Some others may be slower because their storage time, for instance, may be longer. Now, the synthesis allows to put this all together and to prioritize the action points. As I said, it's the critical loss points that determine the action plan from this approach. A key point of, let's say, the advantage of having the critical loss points identified is that the resources that you allocate can have a direct impact on reduction quite in the short term. Because you would not go and see what is happening, whether you go to this point or the other for the intervention of reduction, but you would already know that that critical loss point represents one of the best that you can change something. This is an example from cabbage in Cambodia. So as you see, the analysis that we suggest allows you to map the food supply chain. For each step, each actor is identified. For each actor, a percentage is allocated from the loss. point of view. But then you also have to decide whether the measure that you have allows you to have the best impact, so the highest reduction, or not. It may be, for instance, that in the cases of the food supply chains that are made for exports, the quality criteria is set so high that you could not, due to constraints that are legal or in any other way contractual, you could not intervene in that point for the selection of the quality that is to be delivered outside of the production specific point. However, in that case, you may have solutions such as for that critical loss point, you have the solution of, for instance, recovery and redistribution, which allows you to recover that safe and nutritious food, which has been already produced. So all the resources were already extracted, but then you deliver it to not necessarily donation, but it may also be a different market. This, of course, allows us to understand the supply chain level and allows us to understand that there is need to negotiate different type of, let's say, the flexibilities under that contract. However, if you know that that is a critical loss point, you would have an idea as well to whom you should talk with in order to have the best reduction. Now, why we are talking about this topic? This topic is has been identified in several different contexts as a key topic that can impact climate because of the resources that are being extracted, those which are being utilized along the food supply chain with their impact, such as electricity, such as labor, such as fertilizers, such as any other processing technology. So this all impacts climate. Now, in view of measures to mitigate and adapt, having the prevention of food loss from happening as a first priority in the operations seems like something that, of course, can have the best impact, immediate impact. Now, this the example that I have here is how these measures of prevention of food losses could impact, for instance, the carbon dioxide production. Because obviously, of course, by reduction of food losses, you would prevent these from happening. Now, this is potential, and I would like to stress this fact to you, potential, because as I said, the dynamics at food supply chain level should be considered in the medium to long term as well. So even though you may have an intervention that in the short term may work, sometimes causes transfer from one critical loss point to another. So the approach to prevent food losses would need to be followed up. So, for instance, I encourage you to think that if you have an analysis of a supply chain, you identify the critical loss points, and you decide to intervene in one critical loss point, which may be, for instance,
Doctor, we only have 1 minute.
All right. So these are the different measures that you can have to raise awareness, to implement legislation, to strengthen good agricultural practices and good manufacturing practices.
Thank you.
As I said, yes. So as I said, you have the database that you can improve on. So I encourage you to work on that. The technical platform on loss and waste with the International Day of Awareness on this. And these are the resources that I encourage you to consult. Obviously, I am available, me as well as my colleagues, to answer any of your inquiries and any support requests that you may have after the event. Thank you very much again for inviting us.
Thank you دكتور كاميليا، مستشار الدولي محلل الفاقد والمهدر من الأغذية في منظمة الأغذية والزراعة في إيطاليا.